my video. My name is Putri Oktaviani. I'm from International Class of Economic Education in Universitas Negeri Padang. Now I will explain the material about introduction to economic development with 6 topics. First is history and theory of economic growth. Second is growth, poverty and income distribution. And third is population growth and economic development. 4. Unemployment and employment problems. 5. Urbanization and rural urbanization. And the last is education and health. Theory is a theory that tries to explain the phenomenon of social change, especially in developing country societies. The theory was developed by a number of experts with reference to the idea of improving the socio-economic conditions of developing countries. The initial theory is classified as the classical growth theory, which is further refined by the neoclassical group of ideas from the classical growth theory. On the other hand, the emergence and development of theory of growth itself cannot be separated from the influence of the theories of other social sciences. And economic growth is briefly defined as the process of increasing per capita output in the long run and not in the short run. The emphasis is on 3 aspects. Now the process, increasing per capita output and in the long run. Economic growth is a process, not a picture of the economy at one time or one shot. Here it can be seen that there is a dynamic aspect of an economy, namely seeing the economy as something that develops or changes from time to time. The emphasis is on change or development itself. The theory of economic growth can be defined as an explanation of what factors determine the increase in per capita output in the long run, an explanation of how these factors interact with each other so the growth processes occurs. So the theory of economic growth is nothing but a logical story of the relationship between economic factors regarding how growth occurs. There are 2 terms in connection with theory of growth, with economic growth and economic development. Economic growth refers to an increase in output per capita in the long run. This economic growth is indicated by the existence of a quantitative balancing relationship between a number of means production and the results of all production. On the other hand, economic development is not only related in increasing production quantitatively, it is also related to improving the quality of people's lives. As said above, there are 2 major currents in the theory of economic growth, namely the analytical school and the historical school. During their development, these 2 schools touch each other, which is sometimes difficult to categorize whether the theory of ethical belongs and to the analytical or historical school alone, or even partially belongs to the 2 schools. In the following explanation, will present an explanation of the details of the 2 schools of thought. First is the classical school. Ideas of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Thomas Robert Malthus point out the classical thinkers held a broad view of economic activity in people's life. They put economic phenomena in society's overall economic system. Moreover, his observations about economic development usually span quite a long period of time. The framework of thought and appreciate pattern of the classical school expert regarding economic phenomena in the process of its development are marked by a number of basic arguments that are still simple in nature. Even by today's standards, it may be oversimplified. Its attention is paid to economic development as it happens to societies in developing countries. These countries already have an industrial base, so that their economy takes in the form of production that can be discussed and generate increase in income. The system of analysis of thinkers in the classical school was based on the assumption that it was if economic development was running in a free market situation, with perfect competition without the element of monopoly. Although they have views and though they contain many similarities, of course the classical thinkers have difference in their approaches and model of study. And second is Adam Smith. Adam Smith is often referred to as the father of economics modern. he is actually better than a noun theory, which is theory that investigates the factors that determine the value or price of an item. In his monumental book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the World Nations, one can see the main theme of how the capitalist economy grows. In this book, the theory of economic growth was explored for the first time in a long and systematic manner. Therefore, Adam Smith's theory is often considered as the beginning of a systematic study of the problem of economic growth. According to Adam Smith, economic growth is divided into 5 sequential stages, starting from the hunting stage, the livestock stage, the agricultural stage, the trade stage, and the last in the industrial stage. According to this theory, society will move a traditional society to a modern and capitalist society. Third is David Ricardo. Classical growth theory explains more rapid development at the hands of David Ricardo. This development takes the form of an elaboration in which the growth model becomes sharper both in the terms and the concept used in terms the growth process mechanism itself. However, it should be emphasized here that the outline of the growth conclusion drawn by Ricardo are not too different from Adam Smith's theory. The theme of the process economic growth is still the combination of population growth and output growth. The general conclusion also remains the same, namely that is the population who eventually reach a stationary position. As was the case with Adam Smith, Ricardo considered that the numbers of factors of land production, i.e. natural resources, could not increase and thus act as a limiting factor in the growth process of society. The main difference lies is about recording this distribution of income in the elaboration of the growth mechanism and in revealing the clearer role of the growth process sector. The growth process described by Ricardo is categorized by the following characteristics. A. Limited amount of the land, which is very difficult to expand as a factor production. B. The increases or decrease in the availability of labor population is in accordance with the wage level, namely whatever is above or below the minimum wage level, which Ricardo calls the natural wage rate. And C is capital accumulation occurs when the minimum profit required to attract them to invest increases. D. From science to trade or technology and invest. And E. The agricultural sector. 4 is Thomas Robert Malthus. In the view of the classical school of economic development in general, it appears that Malthus' ideas about the significance of the problem of population growth have had an influence on economic development. Thus, it is necessary to pay attention to this problem because population problems have meaning and relevance to economic development. According to Malthus, naturally the population will continue to increase faster than the food supply. Food production per capita, of course, will decrease while the population increases. Malthus argues that it's not a guarantee that quantity population growth will affect the continuity of growth. Malthus relied a number of factors containing continued growth. A quantitative increase in population is by no means a guarantee that his real income will also increase accordingly. Population growth only supports growth in the economic structure. If economic development can increase the real producing power, effective demand of the community as a whole, only then under such circumstance will the accumulation of capital be carried out as a key feature of the growth process. At the same time, it will also generate demand for labor. And 5. Karl Marx. The pattern of dynamic approach, which concerns the development of society as a whole in the long term. It is not a new perspective that has emerged in modern times. This course, though, has been contained in the ideas of the classic scholars. This pattern of approach is even more prominent in Karl Marx's system of thought, which can be considered the most comprehensive dynamic theory. In these connections, the view of classic scholars and Karl Marx can be included in the category of grand theories and sometimes as magnificent dynamics. Karl Marx had like many aspects of his theory, which is known as a conflict theory. In the perspective of economic growth, Marx emphasizes the distribution of the development of society from a simple pattern to a society 1996, Wolf Wittmer Rostow, the theory of economic growth put forward by Wolf Wittmer Rostow is the founder of the linear stage of growth theory in the 1950s until 1960 decade. Rostow, the theory greatly influenced the views and perceptions of economists regarding development strategies that must be carried out. Rostow theory is based on development experiences that have been experienced by developed countries, especially in Europe. By observing the development process in Europe countries from the Middle Age to the modern century, Rostow then formulates a development pattern that will become the evolutionary stage of an economic country. Rostow divides the economic development process of a country into 5 stages, namely traditional economic stage, take-off, pre-condition stage, and take-off stage, stage towards and maturity, and the last is high mass consumption stage. 7 is Keynes and Neo-Keynes. John Maynard Keynes in 1936 put forward a dove which became known in macroeconomic theory as the Keynesian Revolution. Keynes theory focused on effective aggregate demand in the country as a strategic variable in overcoming factors. Effective aggregate demand at home shapes spending on consumption, spending on investment, and government spending to have a positive impact on economic activity and reduce unemployment. Keynes theory was motivated by the depression situation in 1929 until 1923, and in the short-term stabilization purpose and not to solve long-term problems in development. Thank you. Poverty is one of the fundamental issues that has become the main focus and concerns of the Indonesian government. Poverty causes a person or group of people to be unable to fulfill their basic rights such as unfulfilled needs for food, health, education, employment, housing, clean water, land, natural resources, and the environment. Various poverty reduction programs have been implemented by the government, but poverty alleviation has not achieved the result as expected. Poverty is a complex problem because many factors influence the creation of poverty. As a multidimensional problem, poverty is related to various aspects of people's lives, so the efforts to solve the problem of poverty are not easy. Many factors are suspected to have a major influence on poverty conditions. The persistence of the high poverty rate indicates that there is something that needs to be observed and reviewed on the poverty alleviation strategies, policies, and programs implemented by the government. In terms of budget allocation used for poverty alleviation, the government has serious intention to fighting poverty. Apart from poverty, another crucial problem facing Indonesia is unemployment. Although in the last 3 years there has been a significant decline, the open unemployment rate in 2009 was still quite high, namely a 14% or equivalent to 926 million people. Less than 35 hours a week is also a complete problem because the number reaches 36 million people. Unemployment occurs due to various factors. The number of job opportunities available is generally smaller than the existing workforce. Even though the number of unemployed people so far has been quite large, this condition lasts for years, so that there was an accumulation of unemployment which were getting bigger every year. This situation occurs because of high population growth and also because of the scarcity of capital for invest so that it is unable to absorb the additional profit. Another factor is the competence of job seekers that is not in accordance with the needs of the job market, which results in the existing workforce unable to fulfill the available job opportunities. Ineffective labor market information for job seekers also contributes to unemployment. The large number of unemployed and underemployed must be monitored because it can be cause very social impact than can disrupt development. In addition to causing poverty consequence, unemployment also contributes to inequality in income distribution. Unemployment can also cause people's purchasing power to decrease, so the demand for manufactured goods will decrease. The situation to invest will make efforts attack in order to expand or establish new industries. As such, the still high rate of poverty and unemployment and a decrease in these levels will hinder economic growth. Inequality of income distribution in a country is inseparable from the development strategy of let's say it. In 1960, many developing countries have adopted economic development with a growth strategy. High economic growth has always come out to solve various social and political problems. Experience has shown, however, that the expected return effect does not work out perfectly. The economic growth that has been achieved has not been followed by a comparable expansion of employment opportunities, so that the number of unemployed is still large. The poverty rate has not decreased significantly, and there are indications of widening inequality in income distributions. This indicates that the development strategies taken is not well targeted, so that the results are only enjoyed by certain groups. Therefore, efforts to create high economic growth accompanied by equitable efforts in income distribution need to be carried out consistently and sustainably in order to reduce poverty, unemployment, and income inequality. Regional income disparities. Inequality in economic development between various regions in Indonesia and the unequal distribution of natural resources are the causes of unequal distribution of income between regions in Indonesia in particular, are in school or are working. Young workers with relatively low levels of education and skills will also receive low wage, and this will lead to an even more gaping distribution of income. On the other hand, if these young people continue to add knowledge and improve their abilities and skill, it will result in a reduction in low-income population groups, so that the next consequence is that the level of income distribution GAP will decrease. The problem of inequality in income distribution can be viewed for the aspects. First, distribution of income between income groups, such distribution of income. Second, distribution of rural income or urban-rural income disparities. According to data from the World Bank, the pattern shows an urban base that is development that is oriented towards urban areas, where heavy pressures on the organized industrial sector, which is the causes of even more inequality of income distribution in the future. According to my colleagues and a British economist said that urban base occurs in developing countries like Indonesia, where the allocation of resources is prioritized in urban areas rather than equity or efficiency considerations. Profits that the reason for the imbalance in distribution of income are due to economic growth, population growth, rural zone development, and a plutocratic government system. Some of the aspects that have been suspected by profits were developed by Kuznets, known as the Kuznets hypothesis, which caused controversy among researchers of income distribution in various countries. This hypothesis states that relationship between the level of economic growth and the unequal level of income showing in the early stage of development becomes negative. Thus, in the first stage of economic development, there will be a level of unequal distribution of income that gets worse, stabilizes, and ultimately declines. According to Kuznets, these development patterns cannot be separated from the social and economic conditions of a society. The causes or the concentration of wealth in the upper group, the effectiveness of progressive tax, and the accumulation of capital ownership. Meanwhile, Kuznets states that as economic development increases, the income sharing gap of society also increases. Because the faster the economy develops, people expect higher returns from their education, while education opportunities are very limited. The level of population participation in employment is relative to the number of young people who are in income distribution. The income distribution of a region can determine how high regional income is able to create change and improvements in society, such as reducing poverty, unemployment, and other difficulties in society. Unequal income distribution will not create prosperity for society in general, but will only create prosperity for certain groups. between rapid economic growth and income distribution, that there is a trade-off which implies that even distribution of income can only be achieved if the rate of economic growth is lower. Thus, high economic growth will always be accompanied by worsening distributions of income or an increase in economic development, not just a relative inequality. According to Parts, the causes an increase in relative inequality but will also cause a decline in the absolute of living the poor. Or in the words, the relative inequality and absolute poverty will increase as a result of rapid economic growth. The result of research on the long-term relationship between economic growth and income distribution conducted by Professor Simon Kuznets of Harvard University points out the process of economic development in its early stage is generally accompanied by a sizable decline in revenue sharing. Higher population growth rate. Global population has skyrocketed since the beginning of the industrial era, from just under 1 billion in 80,000 to 1.65 billion in 90 and over to over 6 billion by 2000, where population topped 7 billion by 2020. Rapid population growth began in Europe and other now-developed countries, but in the recent decades, most population growth rate has been centered in the developing world. Compared with developed countries which often have birth rates near or even below replacement zero population growth levels, the low-income developing countries have very high birth rates. More than 5/6 of all of the people in the world now live in developing countries, and some 97% of net population growth birth means that in 2020 took place in developing regions. But population dynamics varies widely among developing countries. Population of some developing countries, particularly in Africa, continue to grow rapidly from 1990 to 2008. Population in the low-income countries grew at 2.2% per year and compared to 1.3% per year. Middle-income developing countries show greater variance, with some having achieved lower birth rates and closer to those prevailing in rich countries. The birth rate is about 3 times as high in the low-income countries as in the high-income countries. In sub-Saharan Africa, the annual birth rate is 39 per 1,004 times the rate in high-income countries. Intermediate but still relatively high birth rates are found in South Asia, the Middle East and North Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. East Asia and the Pacific have a moderate birth rate of 14 per 1,000, partly the result of birth control policies in China. The very wide range of growth birth rates around the world is illustration. The average rate of population growth rate was about 1.4% in developing countries. A major implication of high birth rate is that the active labor force has to support proportionally almost twice as many children as it does in rich countries. By contrast, the proportion of people over the age of 65 is much greater in developing nations. Both older people and children are often referred to as an economic dependency, viewed in the sense that he must support financially by the country's labor force. In low-income countries, there are 66 children under 15 for each 100 working age, 50 until 65 adults, while in middle-income countries, there are 41, and in high-income countries, just 26. In contrast, income countries and 23 in high-income countries. Thus, the total dependence ratio is 72 per 100 in low-income countries and 49 per 100 in high-income countries. In their lifetime savings and by public and private pensions. In contrast, in developing countries, public support for children is very limited, so dependency has a further magnified impact in developing countries. We may conclude, therefore, that not only are developing countries characterized by higher rates of population growth, but they must also contend with greater dependency burdens than rich nations, though with a weight gulf between low and middle-income developing countries. The circumstances and conditions under which population growth becomes a deterrent to economic development is a critical issue. Education and health are basic objectives of development. They are important and in themselves. Health is central to well-being and education is essential for a safe living and a rewarding life. Both are fundamental to the broader notions of expanded human capabilities that lie at the heart of the meaning of development. At the same time, education plays a key role in the ability of a developing country to absorb modern technology and to develop the capacity for self-sustaining growth and development. Moreover, health is prerequisite for increases in productivity, and successful education now relies on adequate health as well. Thus, but health and education can also be seen as a vital components of growth and development as input to the aggregate production functions. Their dual role as both inputs and output gives health and education their central importance in economic development. It is hard to overstate how truly dramatic improvements in world health and education have been. In 1950, some 280 of every 1,000 children in the developing world as a whole died before their 50th birthday. And in middle-income countries, though not compared with 6 per 1,000 in high-income countries and just 4 in many European countries. When some important killers have been completely or nearly eradicated, smallpox used to kill more than 5 million people every year. The virus no longer exists outside of your laboratory samples. Major childhood illness such as rubella and polio have been largely controlled through the use of vaccines. In addition, recent decades have witnessed as historical and prudential extensions of literacy and other basic education to a majority of people in the developing world. The United Nations reports that although there were still a staggering 775 million illiterate people aged 15 or older in the world in 2010, but almost two-thirds of the world's illiterate people are women. Despite such outstanding achievements, developing countries continue to face great challenges as they seek to continue to improve the health and education of their people. The distribution of health and education with countries is as important as income distribution. Life expectancy may be quite high for better off people in developing countries, but far lower for the poor. Child mortality rates in developing countries remain more than 10 times higher than those found in the rich countries. These deaths generally result from the conditions that are usually treatable, including millions who continue to die needlessly each year from dehydration caused by diarrhea. If child death rates in developing countries fell the those prevailing in the developed country, the lives of nearly 7 million children would be saved each year. Many children who survive nonetheless suffer chronic problems of malnutrition, debilitating parasitic infections, and other prostate illness. Problems caused by lack of carbohydrates such as iodine, as well as protein, affect up to 2 billion people, but children are particularly vulnerable, whereas citizens in Europe, North America, or Japan have more than 20 years for schooling on average. The average citizen in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia spends less than 5 years in school before taking account of each other. And the voices of the poor confess some of the impact of deprivation and health and education on people's lives. And we examine the roles of education and health in economic development. Thus, two human capital issues are treated together because their close relationship. There are dual impacts of the effects of health funding on the effectiveness of the educational system, and vice versa. And when we speak of investing in person's health and investing in person education, we are after all talking about the same person. We then consider the relationship between income on the one hand and health and education on the other. Despite their close relationship, you will see that higher household income is no guarantee of improved health and education. Human capital must be given direct attention in its own right. Even in economies that are growing rapidly, health and education may be distributed very unequally, just as income and wealth are. But improved health and education help families escape some of the vicious circle of poverty in which they are trapped. Finally, we take a close look at educational and health system in developing countries. To identify the sources of the severe inequalities and inefficiencies that continue to plague them. The evidence reveals that investment in human capital has to be undertaken with both equity and efficiency on income. Education and health as joint investment for development. Health and education are closely related in economic development. On one hand, greater health capital may improve the return to investment in education, in part because health is an important factor in school attendance in the formal learning process of a child. A longer life raises the return to investment in education. Better health at any point during working life may in effect lower the rate of depreciation of educational capital. On the other hand, greater education capital may improve the returns to investment in health because many health programs rely on basic skills or will learn at school, including personal hygiene and sanitation, not to mention basic literacy and numeracy. Finally, an improvement in productive efficiency from investment in education raises the return on life-saving investment in health. Some the links between investments in health and education. The past half century, you are so have witnessed unprecedented advances in human capital. Health and education levels improved in both developing countries, but by most measures, they have improved more rapidly in developing countries. As a result, there has been some international convergence in these measures. Only in sub-Saharan Africa, where life expectancy fell due to the AIDS crisis, has some doubt been cast on trend toward catching up in health. As a primary enrollment rise in developing countries, education is catching up, though some observers believe that the quality gap may be larger than ever. Even though the health and education gap between developed and developing countries remains large and further improvements may prove difficult, the progress to data has been unacceptable. Urbanization refers to the shift in population from the rural urban to areas, the gradual increase in the number of people living in urban areas, and the ways in which a society adjusts to this change. This refers specifically to the process by which cities become larger as more people start living and working in the area. The United Nations projects that half of the world's population will live in urban areas by the end of 2008. It is estimated that by 2050, approximately 60-40% of developing countries and 80-60% of developing countries will experience urbanization. That equates to about 3 billion urban residents by 2050. The majority of which will occur in Africa and Asia. In particular, the United Nations also recently projects that nearly all of the global population growth from 2017 to 2030 will absorb by cities about 1 billion new people over the next 13 years. Urbanization is relevant to a wide variety of disciplines, including geography, sociology, economics, urban planning, and public health. This phenomenon is closely related to modernization, industrialization, and sociological processes such as rationalization. Urbanization can be seen as specific condition at a given time, for example, a 4% of the total population or area in a city, or as an increase in those conditions over time. Thus, urbanization can be measured either in terms of the rate of urban development relative to the overall population, or as the rate at which the proportion of urban population increases. Urbanization creates immense social, economic, and environmental change, providing opportunities for sustainability with the potential to use resources more efficiently, create more sustainable land, and protect the biodiversity of the natural ecosystem. Urbanization is not only a modern phenomenon, but also the historical transformation of human social roots that are fast and historic on a global scale, where rural culture is rapidly developing to be replaced by a more dominant urban culture. The first major change in the settlement patterns was the accumulation of hunter-gatherers into rural areas thousands of years ago. Village culture is characterized by common bloodlines, close relationships, and communal behavior, whereas urban culture is categorized by distant lineage, unusual relationship, and competitive behavior. The unprecedented movement of people is expected to continue and increase in the next few decades, increasing the size of the city to size unthinkable a century earlier. As a result, the world's urban population growth curve to that has followed a quadratic hyperbolic pattern. Today, in Asia, urban agglomerates in Osaka, Karachi, Jakarta, Mumbai, Shanghai, Manila, Seoul, and Beijing are home to more than 20 million people each, while Delhi and Tokyo are estimated to be approaching or exceeding 40 million in time. The next decade, outside of Asia, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, London, New York City, Istanbul, Lagos, and Cairo are already or will soon be home to more than 10 million people. And the pull factor of urbanization is more modern city of life, more complexity, facilities and infrastructure, many jobs in the city, school and tertiary education. The driving factor, agricultural land, is getting narrower, feeling incompatible with the culture where it comes from, unemployed because there are not many jobs in the village, and limited facilities and infrastructure in the village, split from the village of origin. Have a strong dream of becoming a rich person, and then the advantages of urbanization. Advantages of urbanization is modernize villagers, increase the knowledge of the villagers, establish good cooperation between residents of an area, and balancing urban communities with rural communities. Due to urbanization, the formation of suburbs, of new settlements on the outskirts of the city, and increasing unemployment, people who do not have permanent jobs, and the problem of housing is cramped and does not meet health requirements. The environment is not healthy, creating social and criminal vulnerability. Development of education and health is directly related to the quality of human resources. Nations, if Indonesia wants the Human Development Index or HDI to improve, then health and education development must get priority. The chairperson of the National Alliance, Poncho Sutowo, assessed that the current situation has been ignored, education and health problems will reduce the total productivity factors or CPF in Indonesia and also in danger of experiencing in the industrialization process. Poncho says there were many countries that experienced a period of setback, but thanks to the development of education and health, they were able to come out of the setback. In fact, there is rapid progress in the academic, financial, and military field. For example, Japan and China, he said to PolitiCindonesians.com in the territorial panel discussions in Jakarta Monday. According to Poncho, to prevent this, building human resources, especially in the fields of education and culture, should not only be based on the availability of the budget alone. However, there is a need for the relevance to be given to these sectors of education and health by the state or government as a whole. Education and health development alone, without direction and without being linked to overall national policies, will not be able to support the achievement of national goals. Meanwhile, developing the education and health sector is not just structural development, as has been implemented to that, but as a form of carrying out to the four constitutional duties of the state government, he said. Meanwhile, head of S.Pd Foundation, Bambang Farmasutiawan, added, if education in Indonesia is the main support for human resources, you will experience a colonial nation syndrome. In fact, the government was once threatened by establishing a foreign school with the name Rintisan Sekolah, Standard International (RSBI) and School International. The syndrome causes an assumption that foreigners are always assumed to be right and smart. To eliminate this syndrome, this nation needs to still in supranational culture value a national education, because the planting of superior national and cultural values will be able to instill the characteristic of nations, so that colonized nation syndrome will soon be eliminated. On the association's expert staff for decentralization of the Ministry of Health Indonesia reveals that Indonesia currently there is a change in disease burden. In 1990, infectious diseases such as ARI, TB, diarrhea were the biggest causes of death in illness. So, since 2010, non-communicable diseases have become the biggest causes of death and disability. Among them are strokes, accidents, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. The high rate of non-communicable diseases cause the mental or spiritual health of human resources to be disturbed. As a result, physical problems increase. To overcome this result, it is necessary to build family resilience as the smallest community and by building spiritual intelligence. It is said that human resources capable of presenting national resilience will only be realized if they have a mental and spiritual social health which is manifest through a quality family. To achieve this, it requires comprehensive cooperation between the government, educational institutions, religious institutions, family, and communities. Yeah, that's all about my explanations. Thanks for your attention, guys, and sorry for my mistakes, because this is my first time making a video on camera like this. And thanks for your attention. Goodbye! And don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share and like this video. Okay? Bye! And sorry for my mistakes, because this is my first time making video and yeah, thanks for your